If you have your Bibles, could you open to Daniel chapter 2, verse 31. We're going to pick up where we left off as we're going through this book of Daniel. So far, as we've gone through this book together, there's been a lot of narrative. You know what I mean by narrative, right? Stories. Lots of great stories, true stories, though. There was a story about Daniel's faithfulness and how God blessed him for that. A story of how King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and he summons his wise men, and the wise men cannot tell the king what dream he had. He had to actually tell him his own dream. And then to interpret it, they couldn't do that. So Nebuchadnezzar wanted to have all these wise men killed. And Daniel prays with the three others, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, for God's mercy. And he asks to meet with the king. And that's where we're getting to now. He's going to have this meeting with the king. But this is where the literary genre of the book changes. And that's kind of how the book of Daniel is. It's got a lot of twists and turns. So now we're going to be moving from narrative right into strict prophecy. And this is not just prophecy. This is actually apocalyptic prophecy, at least in part. Because part of what we're going to see here in this dream and its interpretation, some of this has already been fulfilled. To us, it is history. But there is a part of this dream that has not yet been fulfilled, and it will not be fulfilled until the end times. And that's what makes it apocalyptic prophecy. And it's going to, I think, be amazing when you actually see the details of this dream, just how accurately, the things that have happened, just how accurately they've happened. And this is also going to be this apocalyptic prophecy that we will get to. That will be in connection with Revelation. So you'll hopefully get to see some of the connection there as I'll be drawing out some scripture as we continue to move through this book. But I do want you to know it's going to be a little different. Today's message is going to be a little bit more teachy than it's going to be preachy, because there's a lot of details to cover with this dream and its interpretation. If you really like history, or if you really like prophecy, you might love this kind of message. But if you're not one of those kinds of people, and I'm not a history buff either, I would ask for you to look through this message through these lenses, to realize what God has done. As you hear about all these facts and details, to realize what God has done so accurately, but then with that, to find the hope in knowing what is to come. To me, that's the exciting part. When we see God make a promise and fulfill it so accurately, but yet part of that promise is not yet fulfilled, we should have the confidence the rest of that promise is going to happen, and it's going to be fulfilled just as accurately. And that gets me excited. Maybe history doesn't get me excited as much, but when I'm seeing how God has moved through history, especially through prophecy like this, that really gets me excited. Now I want you to know that this dream, there's actually three parts of this book that correlate together. This dream is going to tie in with chapter 7, which we'll get to later on, which is going to be a dream about 4 beasts. And this also ties in with chapter 8, which has to do with a ram and a goat. So as we go through these parts, I'm going to be trying to draw some correlation between those chapters as well. But we really want to take our time going through this first dream, because if you can get these details, if you can understand what this dream is all about, that's really going to help you when we get to those later parts of the book, and you can build upon that. So Daniel chapter 2, verse 31. It says, "You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty and exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening." So now we know what the subject of the dream is. What is this dream about? Well, in my version of the Bible, I have the English Standard Version, ESV. By the way, if you need a Bible, we do actually have some Bibles out in the chairs now. We've just added those. They are in the ESV, so it's right what I'm preaching from. You can grab one if you'd like there. But in the ESV, I have the word image, that this was an image. That might be a little bit misleading, because when you think of an image, often you're going to probably picture something that's two-dimensional, maybe something on a piece of paper. What Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream was not two-dimensional. It was clearly three-dimensional. So a better word, better translation, and maybe if you have a different translation, you have this, is the word statue. That's what this dream was about. It was a statue. Some translations will say that this statue was dazzling. Some will say that it was bright. Maybe there's some other words different translations use, but the reason that it was bright or dazzling is because, as we're going to find out, this statue was made mostly of metal, and it was probably reflecting light. Translations will also say one of these two words, or maybe more, that this statue was awesome, or it was frightening. This is the Hebrew word, actually it's the Aramaic word, dehal, which means to fear. And actually that is the better translation. This is a frightening, shiny statue that's in the king's dreams. So the king is terrified of this. He is absolutely terrified of this statue. This dream has a grip on his soul. This dream is torturing him. And we've already seen that from the king's sharp response. When he couldn't find anyone that could tell him this dream or interpret that dream, what did he want to do? He wanted to tear them limb from limb, right? He wanted to get rid of all of his wise men at the same time. Or if somebody was able to do it, he's like, I'll give you rewards and you'll get high honor. Very extreme response. He's very emotional about this dream. It is torturing him. Now, we're not sure exactly how big this statue was, but there are some scholars that are curious if the statue that the king builds, which we'll get to in chapter 3, was actually patterned off of this dream that he had, in the statue in this dream. Now, the king would end up building his own statue that would be 90 feet tall. So if you can imagine a statue being 90 feet tall, that might be about the size of the statue in the king's dream. Daniel says that the statue was before the king. So that means the king was a participant in his own dream. He was in that dream. He was standing in front of this giant, frightening statue. Verse 32. The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. So now we have a description of what this statue was made of. And I think we have a picture here, and you can see there's the statue. 5 different parts, kind of. The legs and the feet sort of go together. We're going to get to that. But 5 different parts in a sense, and made from different materials as you work your way from the head down toward the feet. Now, I think the best way to go through this dream is to go through the interpretation of what we have so far, and then we're going to conclude the rest of the dream next week and the interpretation that goes with that. So with this part of the dream, let's move toward its interpretation. Will you go down to verse 36, please? Daniel says, "This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretations." So Daniel is saying this after he's told the king the whole dream, which again we're going to hear about the other part next week. And these words that are in Aramaic here are both humble but yet also bold. He's using bold words first in saying, this is your dream. He's saying, this is certainly your dream. I have no doubts about it. What God has given to me, the dream that I've had, this message that God has given to me, and that I'm telling you right now, O king, this is it. This is the dream. I have no doubt about it. So he's very, very bold in saying that, but he's also humble in the way he says it, because he says, we will tell the dream, tell the interpretation of the dream to the king. Now, who's the we? Who else is telling this interpretation with Daniel? No, it's just Daniel. He's the only one. But he's using the word we. Why is that? Well, scholars have debated this, and probably this is just a literary thing. He's avoiding using the word I. Even though he's the one that's telling this dream, he wants to keep away from pride. He wants to keep away from boasting or arrogance. And he's saying, this is kind of me saying this dream to you in its interpretation, but it's really God. So if there's a we, it's God working with Daniel, but it's really primarily God. This is a work of God that's being done here. Verse 37. You, O king, the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, and into whose hand he has given, wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of heaven, making you rule over them all, you are the head of gold. So Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar that he and his kingdom are the first part of the statue. Notice he's going to work his way from the top down. He's saying Nebuchadnezzar, or the kingdom of Babylon, is the head. That would represent for them present day. As he goes down through the rest of the statue, those parts are going to represent other kingdoms, other empires that are to come. And I do want you to know that Daniel is using the name of the king and really whatever empire he's naming as he goes through this statue interchangeably. It's as if Babylon is, in a sense, Nebuchadnezzar, right? Because a kingdom is really as powerful as its king. The kind of king you have is the kind of kingdom you're going to have as well. So just note that as we go through this statue, that the king and the kingdom for each part of the statue are really used interchangeably here. Now he calls Nebuchadnezzar, interesting, the King of Kings. Is there anybody else you can think of that's given that title, the King of Kings? Jesus is called the King of Kings. Now why would he call Nebuchadnezzar that? That almost sounds blasphemous, right? And there's possibly three reasons that he's calling Nebuchadnezzar here the King of Kings. First of all, Nebuchadnezzar is the King of Kings in the way that he's the most powerful king on the earth. Of all the other kings on the earth, Nebuchadnezzar is the most powerful one. Secondly, Nebuchadnezzar is literally a king of kings. He is kind of like the emperor in a sense. He's the main king. But he had other kings that were ruling underneath him. The third reason, and this is something that I would believe in, is that compared to the other kings that are to come, represented throughout the rest of this statue, Nebuchadnezzar was the best one. And that may not be saying much. But when you compare him to the kings that are going to be coming in the future, he's about as good as it gets. So in that way, he also might be the King of Kings. Now, I want you to notice, when we were looking at that statue, you go from gold to silver to bronze to iron, right? And then you have some clay mixed in at the end. As you move down, you're moving through metals that are going from most valuable, right? Gold being the most valuable, to least valuable. And we're going to see that. Each kingdom that comes, in a sense, becomes less valuable than the one before it. Because as you move on and the next kingdom comes in, things get worse. Morality drops. The king that comes after is even worse than the one before. So these kingdoms are losing value over time. However, you should also notice how as you go down through these metals, they're going from weakest to strongest. Weakest being gold, then silver, then bronze, and then iron being the strongest of those metals. The kingdoms that are going to come are going to be stronger and stronger and bigger than the ones that were before. So just take note of that. But Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon represent the gold. Daniel says that this is a kingdom that has been given by the God of heaven. We've already seen that, right? Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 to 2. God handed Israel over to Nebuchadnezzar. These people that rise in power, these people that go to wars with other nations, listen, they're only going to get to do as much as God allows them to do. Right? Because God is the supreme ruler. They can't overpower or outwill God. So Nebuchadnezzar is reminding the king, listen, this kingdom that you have and this rule that you have, you only have that because God has allowed for you to have that. God is the one ultimately that is in power. And Babylon would be, in a sense, a global power for 60 years. Nebuchadnezzar ruling over them as king for 43 years before the next kingdom, this next empire, would come. And I do want to draw a correlation now then to Daniel chapter 7. When we get to Daniel 7, the dream of the four beasts, the first beast of that dream is going to represent Babylon. That beast is going to be a lion with wings. And you compare it to the three beasts that come after, it's about as good looking as the beasts get. Again, this is probably the most valuable kingdom as far as what is yet to come. So let's go ahead and move ahead to verse 39 and see what comes next. Remember, from here on out, everything Daniel's saying, this is going to be future to the king and to him. This is stuff that hasn't happened yet. Verse 39, another kingdom inferior to you shall rise after you. Notice again that Daniel does not say the king, what king is going to rise. He says there's a kingdom that is going to rise. He's using those terms interchangeably. Now, there's not a whole lot of detail that Daniel gives about this second kingdom, but there is a lot of historical meaning. And there is more detail to come in chapter 7 and chapter 8 of this second kingdom. I want to tell you the second part of this statue, the one that is made of silver, is Medo-Persia, ruled by King Cyrus. This is a kingdom that will overpower Babylon. And that did happen 539 BC. Remember, it's the silver kingdom. It's got a little bit less value than the one before with Nebuchadnezzar. Because Nebuchadnezzar was a tyrannical king, but he did have some good points to him. We'll see throughout this book that Nebuchadnezzar worships God at least 2 times. And we'll also find out in chapter 4 that Nebuchadnezzar goes through this period of like madness and isolation. And Daniel tells him, you're not going to come out of that until you start following the God of heaven. And that's certainly what happens. And there's some scholars that debate maybe that wasn't really King Nebuchadnezzar. There was an author flaw or error. It was somebody else that went through that time of madness. But I disagree. I believe the Word of God is inerrant. And it was indeed King Nebuchadnezzar that went through that. So this is a king ultimately that ended up following the God of the Jews and not his own gods anymore. So he had some good points. Not so much with the one after him, King Cyrus. But King Cyrus wasn't all bad either. He had a few good points. Cyrus, of course, is the one who's connected with that infamous, very, very critical, important time of Israel getting to return to their homeland. That was very, very important for the history of Israel. And Cyrus was involved with that. But the kings are getting worse and worse. Calvin, if you like to read Calvin says we see that Cyrus's kingdom is not called inferior, though having less splendor or opulence in human estimation, but because the general condition of the world was worse under the second monarchy, as men's vices and corruptions increase more and more. So these kingdoms that keep coming, things are just getting worse and worse under those rulers. But Medo-Persia is also stronger than Babylon was. Medo-Persia ruled more geographical territory, and this kingdom lasted longer than Babylon did. Now, some people don't believe that it's a coincidence that the part of the statue that represents Medo-Persia has 2 arms to it. And there's some curiosity if those 2 arms actually represent the division that was involved with Medo-Persia. Because although this was a united kingdom, there was some division. And it was between those 2 parts, Persia, and it's not Medio, but really Media is the name of it. So Media and Persia, those arms may represent that division. Certainly that's the case when we get to Daniel 8, where we're going to see the ram. There's 2 horns to the ram. Again, those 2 horns representing division between Media and Persia in this one kingdom. Also, to draw the connection again, in chapter 7, this is going to be the second beast, which is going to be like a bear, very ferocious. Second part of verse 39 there, if you continue reading along. And yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. Again, very little detail given in this chapter about what this third kingdom is going to be like. We'll see more of that in chapter 7. But this third part of the statue is Greece, ruled by who? Alexander the Great. Yes, that is the third part of the statue. Again, Greece having less virtue, less value than Medo, Persia, and Babylon before it, but definitely much, much stronger of an empire. Greece would conquer Medo-Persia in 331 BC, and this kingdom is going to be so strong that Daniel even uses these words, they're going to rule over all the earth. This is the kingdom, it seems like, that they are recognized as the true global power of their time. Greece was feared by all people around the world. And Alexander the Great at that time would be recognized truly as the ruler of the entire civilized world. This third kingdom is going to come up again in chapter 7. It's going to be the third beast, and that beast is going to be a leopard with 4 wings and with 4 heads. It's amazing the accuracy again, because if you look in history, you'll find that Alexander the Great took his power and he split his power up with his 4 generals. In a sense, they took 4 different parts of the kingdom, and we're seeing that here given in prophecy hundreds of years earlier. It's absolutely incredible. And then again, Greece will come up in chapter 8, the ram and the goat. Of course, Alexander will represent the goat when we get to that part. Verse 40. I know this is a lot of detail. By the way, you might want to watch this again if you have Facebook or YouTube, just to kind of get some more of this detail. We're covering a lot, but this is all critical to some other stuff we're going to come to in the book. Verse 40. This is where things start to get crazy. And there shall be a 4th kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things, and like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these things. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed, just as you saw the iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with the soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. So, there is a 4th global power that is to come. This 4th global power will have less value, once again, but they will also be much, much more powerful. Listen to some of these words that Daniel uses to describe this 4th power. He says, they will break, they will smash, they will break to pieces, they will crush, and then he says they will break again. You know, if you can imagine these kingdoms being the Avengers, if you've ever seen any of those Marvel movies, this 4th kingdom is like Hulk, right? This is like Hulk's smash here. That's what this kingdom is like, seriously. This 4th kingdom is Rome, kind of. We're going to cover that. We're going to need more explanation here. This 4th kingdom will actually take us right up to the time of Jesus. Rome will defeat Greece around 30 BC. I mean, we're coming right up to the birth of Christ there. Now notice there's 2 parts of the statue though. There's the legs and the feet. And some people would argue that these are 2 totally different kingdoms. You have legs of iron and feet of iron and clay. But I and many other scholars, I wouldn't call myself a scholar. Not quite. Not even close. But I would agree with the scholars who would say it is the same kingdom. And the reason you see that is because there's iron throughout both of those pieces. There's something that connects those 2 parts of the statue, the legs and the feet. So I would argue this is somehow the same kingdom here. Now we could see already though, this kingdom is different than the other 3. And Daniel is going to repeat that when we get to Daniel chapter 7. He's going to talk about how the 4th beast, which represents Rome, is different than the 3 beasts that come before it. Now, if you take that stance that somehow the legs and the feet are the same kingdom, you still have one of 3 possibilities in how you can interpret this. How are these 2 parts of the statue the same kingdom? Option 1 is you would believe that the legs and the feet both were historic Rome as we knew it. It's done though. The legs and the feet. That kingdom came, that kingdom went. For both of those things. The legs and the feet would be that kingdom of Rome. It's over. The other view number 2, is that you would believe The legs would represent the kingdom of Rome that we knew that's come to an end, but the feet would represent some kind of kingdom that came to power and overtook Rome. And so we should be able to go right back in history and point to, that's the kingdom that did it. But you're going to struggle to find a kingdom that really matches that description. The third option is, and this is the one that I would agree with, is that the legs represent historic Rome as we knew it, that started and that kingdom has come to an end, but the feet represent a Rome-like kingdom that doesn't immediately follow. So there's some kind of undetermined gap between the legs, which is Rome, and the feet, which is in a sense like Rome, but we don't know when it's going to be. It might even be a kingdom that hasn't even come yet. This might be a very, very future kingdom in some way. And in the vision of the four beasts in Daniel chapter 7, there's a bit of a carryover as well in that. Daniel seems to allude to this kind of a break that happens for this kingdom. He starts by saying that the fourth beast will use its iron teeth. Notice the repetition of the word iron. It will use its iron teeth to devour anything in its path. But then he says, almost as if he's saying afterward, whatever's left, this beast will use its feet. Notice again the repetition of the word feet to stomp out whatever is left. So I would argue that the stamping happens after the biting. Okay? Some kind of gap in between the legs and the feet. Now you notice that Daniel's making a really big deal about the 10 toes. What do these 10 toes signify of this statue? The 10 toes are also going to hook in a sense, with 10 horns. When we get to Daniel 7, the fourth beast has these 10 horns that correlate to these 10 toes. And the 10 horns of Daniel 7 are going to connect unquestionably with the 10 horns that are mentioned in the book of Revelation. When you read the book of Revelation, Revelation 12:3, Revelation 13:1, Revelation 17, you'll read about these 10 horns. So what are the 10 toes, which are also the 10 horns? What does that signify? Revelation gives us that answer. Revelation 17:12, it says, "And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings." What does it say? "Who have not yet received royal power." These kings haven't been here yet. And this is John speaking after Jesus, after even the ascension into heaven. But they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. Trivia question, I asked this, or I think I mentioned this several months ago. When you read Revelation, let's see who can remember. If you ever read Revelation and you see the word beast, who does beast signify? Satan. Satan is always the beast, right? So Revelation tells us, in the future there's going to be these 10 kings ruling directly under the reign of Satan. Can you think back to a time in Rome historically when 10 kings were ruling together, side by side, in that kingdom? I can't, right? It hasn't happened historically. This all seems to be pointing to this is something that's going to happen in the future. Here's something else that's interesting. So far through this vision of the statue, and also chapter 7 and chapter 8, we're given information about these future kingdoms and also the divisions that happen within them. Remember, with Medo-Persia, we talked about the 2 arms and the 2 horns, that division between Media and Persia. With Greece, you have the 4 wings and the 4 heads of the beast in chapter 7. You have those 4 generals. And it's happening here as well when it's talking about Rome. First, you have the legs. You have the 2 legs of Rome. That probably signifies how Rome, the historic Rome that we knew, was split into the eastern part of Rome and the western part of the Rome. There were 2 different kingdoms. with one kingdom coming to an end much, much sooner than the other. But now we have the feet and the specific mention of these 10 toes, these 10 horns, these 10 future kings. So this is not going to be a monarchy, this kingdom that is to come. This is going to be a federation. These are 10 kings coming together to rule together. And Daniel makes reference to that. Once we see the rest of this dream, he says, there's this fifth kingdom we're going to talk about next week, but he says it's going to come in the days of those kings, plural. And I would interpret he's talking about these 10 kings that are here. Now, there's a weakness when we come to the feet. There's a weakness because the feet are made not only of iron, but iron mixed with clay. So first of all, some of these kings or parts of this kingdom that is to come are going to be weak. They're going to be brittle, like clay that can easily be broken. But there's another issue here, and there's even more division, because clay and iron don't mix well. You put them together, they don't want to stay together. They want to fall apart. And that's going to be the state. We're getting deep. This is amazing, guys. We are getting details of what is going to happen in the future. Accurate details here. This future kingdom is going to be like that. There's going to be a lot of division in this future kingdom. There's going to be a lot of weaknesses in this future kingdom that is to come. Now, there's debate here when Daniel uses the word marrying. He's talking about this marrying that's happening with this kingdom. There's debate. Does that mean that there's people who are ruled under these different kings that are intermarrying with each other? Or is Daniel saying that the kings are trying to work together in a way that they're trying to marry together? I don't know. Whatever it is, it's not working. Okay? This kingdom that is to come is going to be very, very divided and definitely is going to have some weaknesses. Now, of course, there are other clues that this must be a future kingdom. In Revelation, John talks about how Jesus is going to come on the scene and he's going to overcome these 10 kings. Now, it does not seem that John is talking about some kind of just a spiritual victory and how Jesus is going to do that. And the other thing is, you have to say, well, if Jesus already did that, what are we talking about? You know, was it the church that did that? Is it what he did on the cross? In part. But as we're going to see from this, the rest of this dream, what Jesus is going to do, he's literally going to smash to pieces and remove all the kingdoms of old of the earth. Has that happened yet? No, it has not. So again, this must be something that is future, and when you get to Revelation, John is speaking these words after Jesus has risen from the dead and ascended to heaven. So if it's work that was done on the cross, then why is John talking about it as if it's something that hasn't happened yet? Again, this all must be of some kind of future king. So I want to just bring this full circle, okay? The legs of the statue represent, yes, Rome, historic Rome. We're going to call that Rome 1. But the feet and the clay represent some future version of Rome with 10 kings under the direct rule of Satan that is to come. We're going to call that Rome 2. Now, in the future, this kingdom might not even be called Rome, but it's going to bear some resemblance to Rome in some way, and there's some debate. Maybe the leaders of the Rome that's to come in the future will have ancestors. If you trace them back, maybe their ancestors were the rulers of the original Rome, possibly. Daniel seems to also indicate that this future kingdom, Rome 2, is going to come from the same geographical area as Rome 1 came from. Seems clear in Daniel 7. And there's another connection, because when Jesus comes the first time, who's in power? Rome 1. When Jesus comes the second time, who's going to be in power? It's the feet. It's whatever this kingdom's going to be. It's this Rome 2. But it's just amazing to me. This is all amazing. That we could look at these 4 parts of the statue. We could see this prophecy that was predictive. And it was so extremely accurate in what happened with Babylon, then Medo-Persia, then Greece, and then Rome. All of this. extremely accurate. These are things that happened hundreds of years after Daniel spoke them, after he died. So what that means is we should have the same kind of confidence and assurance that what is going to happen with those feet, it's going to be just as accurate. And then what's going to happen with the stone? There's this stone that we're going to talk about next, and this is the part we get excited about. We're going to talk about next week. What's going to happen with that stone, which is Jesus bringing in his kingdom, and how accurate that is going to be as well. I'm getting chills over that. So here's the thing with Daniel and John, though. As Daniel and John, you get to Revelation, it's John that's speaking there, they could probably sense that this Rome 2 was a future kingdom. But they probably couldn't sense just how far away that kingdom would be. And that's often how it works with prophets when they would speak about something that was of the future. They would hear from God something of the future. They can sense that it's futuristic, but they don't know how far away it is. I want to kind of show you a little picture here. And it's kind of how the prophet sees things, right, from the past. It's like when you're looking at a mountain range, and you can see all those mountains, and you think sometimes they're right close together, right? But you get up in an airplane or something, and you look down, and you see they're really, really far apart. So we are experiencing that now. We're in between those two mountains. We're like, man, this Rome 2, and when Jesus is coming, because I think some of us are ready for him now, it's like this is taking a long, long time. The prophets may not have realized it was going to be that far away, but it's because they had that kind of a view. So just to give you something that would help in the way maybe they see things or understood things. This happens also in Isaiah 41. Isaiah 41, it talks about how God is going to raise up his servant, King Cyrus. Okay? But then when you get to Isaiah 42, it goes right into talking about how God is going to raise up his servant, who is Jesus. Now, there's a lot of time that passed between Cyrus and Jesus, but when you read the prophecy, it's like it goes right from one person right to another. So just be aware of that. So we're going to pick up, I know it's a lot of detail. How many of your heads are like, right now? Great. Make sure you watch that again online. So we're going to leave the dream here. We're going to pick this up next week with the most exciting part, which is that stone that is to come, Jesus' kingdom. But it also reminds us of our frailty. The work of God reminds us of just how fragile we are. Because I think it is so easy for us as people to get overconfident and arrogant about our power. And we need to remember who's really on the throne, who really has all the power. We're going to see that next week when that stone breaks apart all of these kingdoms and what Jesus does. He brings it all to an end. As strong as those kingdoms were, what Jesus is going to do is much, much stronger. And it just reminds us of how fragile we are. Right now, there is a man who is sitting on a throne of a very, very large kingdom, and he has just declared war on another country. And there are people that are frightened by that. And this is a crazy thing that is going on in our world. And I cry as I think about what's happening with this world. And I think about this war and all the bloodshed and the lives being lost, everything that's happening. But I never forget that there is someone who is sitting on a much bigger throne with a whole lot more power than that. And he's not going to let things get out of control. He knows what is happening, and he will bring all things together for good. And we need to trust in him at all times as we pray for those who are going through this time. Don't ever forget how fragile we are. Adam and Eve were in the garden, and they saw that fruit that God said, don't partake of it. But they listened to that serpent that said, if you eat of that fruit, you will be like God. And they disobeyed God. It was a terrible thing that they did. And it left this world in this state under the curse of sin. Don't ever forget the Tower of Babel, where the people had this pride. They wanted to disassociate themselves from God. They wanted to build a tower to heaven to show how powerful they were. But God steps in and he separates them by confusing their language. Don't ever forget the days of Noah, where the pride of the people and just, the perversion and what was going on in the world, the sin that was going on. And God said, I'm going to bring an end to it all. And God would bring about judgment upon the earth in the form of a flood that would wipe out just about everything that he created, saving only righteous Noah, his family, and enough animals to basically just restart everything again. Don't ever, ever, ever put your hope in the power of yourself or in the power of humanity. There is no reason to do it, because God has shown us over and over again, he is the one who has all the power. And so I leave you with this challenge. Stop putting your trust into the might of humanity. We have got to stop doing that. And I think there are so many people that we praise as if they are some kind of god or idol. They have nothing other than what God has given to them. You need to put all of your trust, yes, amen, you need to put all of your trust into the might of God. Do you agree with me? Amen, yes. And I want to leave you with a scripture that reminds us of that, because he is the only one who is always faithful, always trustworthy, always mighty, and always good. Psalms 20, it's really one psalm here. Psalm 27 through 8. Some trust in chariots. Say it with me. Some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. They collapse and fall, we will rise and stand. How can we rise and stand? Because if God is for us, then who can be against us?